So this is actually my first in-person indoor speaking gig since February 2020. And it was in February 2020 that I rode my bicycle down here and treated myself to a stay at the hotel, little mom and pop hotel that just happened to be next door to the Dudley Funeral Home, which was the place that this congregation used to rent when I first came down here to speak. The first time I came down here to speak was in, 2012 or 13. I rode down from Ormond by the Sea on my bicycle and rode home the same day on a day when the high temperature was 45 degrees. That was the hard part. Today I arrived here by car with my pal Chris and fellow eco-activist, and Chris is going to raise her hand when I have been prattling for 15 minutes, because nobody likes a long sermon in a church, right? Well, maybe some denominations, but probably not in the UU. And usually also in the UU, another thing we don't have is fire and brimstone. It's not a UU thing, really. But honestly, when I have been seeing all the news, most of us, this congregation is very passionate about the environment. So we've been following the news for years and decades. And most of us are old enough in here to have followed the news for many decades. I actually like getting older, learn a lot. But I think we'd all agree that in recent months, in recent weeks, there have been some really extra intense things. And that's how the title Climate, Fire, and Brimstone came up. Another interesting thing, I'm really grateful for Kermit the Frog and his song. I actually owe that originally to the DeLand congregation, to whom I spoke by Zoom the other week. And she came up, the service director there said, let's do Kermit the Frog. I said, that's great. What a great idea. And what's interesting about the lyrics, he says it's not easy being green. And he talks about, because you blend in with everything else. But actually, as a real environmentalist out there in the real world, part of what isn't easy about being green is that you stick out. You have to go against the social norms. There's also the physical infrastructure of the physical world that we navigate, where it's like a great crusade. Can I avoid a plastic cup today? The battle that we take up the minute we step out our door. Will I remember to say no straw, please? Will there even be an option? So actually it's not easy being green, the whole standing out part and all that, but a very good theme song. So Fire and Brimstone, let's see. Lytton, Canada, 121 degrees. Can you imagine how those people felt? And then the whole town burns down? Or Portland, Oregon, 115, 116? They've never even seen that. Entire swaths of the West just burning down. Now, most people don't think of floods as being on the same page. It's the other side of the coin. When the soil gets denuded and bare, the evaporation takes place faster. And since water on Earth doesn't go away, what goes up must come down somewhere. But instead of being more even and balanced, it's more violent. So we have floods in Germany killing people. We have floods in India, Bangladesh. We have just extreme everywhere. And that's the big splashy, big and scary. The more low-key, terrifying for those of us who try to keep up with these things is the death of the soil food web, the loss of topsoil, loss of insects, loss of biodiversity. It's all happening. Now, at what point? And by the way, here in Florida, ocean, it's still clean. Well, it's not really that far away from here that people have actually here in New Smyrna Beach, very close, where people have actually walked near a canal and become sick from breathing the air because the canal has cyanobacteria in it. There are lots of examples. There's red tide, there's cyanobacteria, it's everywhere. The question is, and this is a question I've asked, when I was younger, say when I first started getting very seriously into eco-activism, which I guess was in my late 30s, I'd been living in Tokyo for 5 years. I come back to the US. And I start thinking, well, gee, I wish the government would declare an emergency. So, sort of like World War II, when the government said, all right, rationing, because we got a war to fight, so we got to, save our resources at home. So I wish the government would say, well, let's do the war, but it's on climate. And that was back around, like 1995 that I first started thinking of this. So why doesn't the government do something? All right. So fast forward to the year 2020. It wasn't a climate related declaration, but basically during the year 2020, the year of COVID, we actually had carbon rationing. The government didn't call it that. It was called stay at home and try not to spread germs. It was called, no unnecessary production, goods and services and all that. But it was basically carbon rationing. And one of the doubts I've always had as an environmentalist is, well, even no matter how much we do, will it be enough? Well, we don't really know that. Can't really predict the future. But one thing we saw during COVID is after a few weeks, people started seeing dolphins in Venice. People started seeing different kinds of birds in their yards here in Florida. Waterways started cleaning up like pretty fast. So it kind of gave me more courage because I've always believed in my heart, well, no matter what, we still have to do the right thing. We have to limit our use of resources. It's just the right thing to do. But I don't really know how effective it'll be. We saw it. And it wasn't a Green New Deal. It wasn't, massive investments in green technology. All those things would be great. All it was stay home, don't buy any unnecessary stuff. And by the way, those are the people who are staying home that had been used to commuting to offices. So it's not like, all right, suddenly we are cutting back, but we weren't cutting back in every way, and nor was everybody trying to. And yet, look at the result that it had. So I want everybody always to hang on to that thought. And it is awful. Like, all right, so now we're having the COVID Delta variant, and we have a rogue state government that isn't really into all this communistic caring about the public health stuff. And all right, so we have that, and which I feel very sad for everybody that has been pent up, just trying to survive. Then now people can finally go out a little more, and now there's this horrible resurgence. But one thing that a lot of us have learned is there were ways that we practiced during the pandemic. There were silver linings that we found during the pandemic. And for each of us, they might have been different. Maybe for me, I realized, wow, how much energy I had been using just to deal with transportation logistics. And suddenly a lot of things could be done by Zoom. Or I was able to attend a conference with 2,000 people from 70 countries by Zoom about how to bring nature into our cities, basically retrofit our cities. And so that was one of my silver linings. Another one of my silver linings is just discovering that, yes, I do like to write. Like, writing is a good way to communicate without interrupting people. And yeah, I still have to work on my tendency to interrupt people, but writing is a handy tool. It's a good way to communicate and feel like I get to have my say. Another silver lining was more of my neighbors were home more often. And since I work at home, that meant I got to meet more of my neighbors. So a lot of us had silver linings, and a lot of those silver linings, whether or not we were particularly trying to be green, ended up being a more low carbon footprint thing. Some people ended up starting their own business that ended up being a lower footprint than what they were doing before, as well as being able to have more time with their families. So even though it's horrible that we're having this resurgence, anything good that we gained during the mandatory shutdown, we can keep, and we're free to keep it. Just like the people in the beauty parlor were unfortunately free to not wear their masks. Well, we're just as free to keep wearing our masks and doing what works, doing what we really believe in. And there's a lot of overlap between pandemic shutdown and climate, like voluntary climate activism. There's a lot of overlap. Nobody can make us do it. even if the government, like let's say, even if the government, the federal government tomorrow says total COVID shutdown, or, the federal government has an intention to move the United States forward with climate action. So let's say the federal government says tomorrow, boom, carbon diet, everybody, climate shutdown. All right, what do you think is going to happen? Oh, sure, every state government's going to go ahead and comply with that. I don't think so. Individuals are going to go ahead and comply with that. Nope. So people can unfortunately do what they want, but we're fortunate too. We can do what we want also. Now, there are certainly obstacles. I have found many obstacles to doing what I want as far as personal climate action. The big kind of physical obstacles out there are, for example, infrastructure. It's not very far distance-wise for me to ride my bicycle most anywhere. But if the road is a high-speed road with no shoulder, and if there's no trees and it's like 8 million degrees out, I'm not going to be as happy to be all environmental as I might have been. For example, if there's a policy, if the government policy basically subsidizes fossil fuels, there's not a lot I can do about it. When I was living in Tokyo, without even trying to be green, I was just living at a lower footprint. The houses, the living quarters were very tiny. The public bath was heated by energy from burning trash. It was 30 years ago. A lot of private houses didn't even have their own baths. You went to the public bath. So that was a certain amount of energy that was conserved without even me being green or whatever. So just an example, policy and infrastructure, they're built-in obstacles. There are things like if you want to support your local mom and pop restaurant, you might not be able to avoid plastic or styrofoam. That just is what it is. But it's not that can't change, but those things are kind of physical obstacles. It would have probably been hard for most of y'all to get here on foot today. It would have been hard, difficult to impossible, or people don't always live near each other. I mean, it just is what it is. Okay, so we can't really fret too much about the physical part, but we can identify the more inner, the easier to work on is that attitudinal. Like we can all work on whatever the attitudinal impediments are. One of the attitudinal impediments that I mentioned was we can't make a difference. Like, it's not going to matter anyway, so why should I care? But now we have evidence with COVID. We have what that shutdown did. We also it's an attitude. You can't make a difference. It's a self-fulfilling attitude. And I actually think everything makes a difference. And that's another thing is some environmentalists will pick on each other. Like, well, it doesn't matter if you drive an electric car or if you ride a bicycle, as long as you're eating meat, it doesn't matter what you're doing. Or, the person with the electric car will say, well, it doesn't matter if you're a vegan, if you're still driving that gas guzzling car. No, it all matters. Everything you do matters. None of us are perfect. Things that I do, like I'm not a vegan, I'm not even a vegetarian. It doesn't mean that the other things I'm doing don't matter. And everything, it's more like instead of people feeling like they have to be perfect, like we have to cut everything, it's more like every cut you make matters. So do what you can. And it's literally I call it a DIY, a grassroots green mobilization, because the government's not mandating it. I'm not mandating it. I don't have that kind of power, but it's just like whoever wants to participate. And it's actually been going on for a long time and it's getting bigger. There's different groups. There are people voluntarily reducing their footprint. They have different names. There are different names online. They're just all there. It's just that we don't all realize how many people are out there doing it. And that's another thing, another attitudinal impediment is thinking, well, I'm just by myself doing this. None of us are by ourselves. And that was probably one of the hardest parts of the pandemic shutdown, is a lot of people felt isolated. But hopefully, I think a lot of us really learned to use the tools that were available to avoid being isolated. And hopefully we'll continue to do that. Another thing that's an impediment is as bad as things have gotten, as bad as the news gets, I think there's still doubt. I mean, there's obviously some people who will always be deniers, like climate deniers. This is not an issue. This is not a problem. Or things are bad, but humans didn't cause it. So I'm not even trying to address those people. I'm not even trying to change their minds. They just are who they are. The people who I'm trying to support are us, all of us who care. But maybe there's some sliver of a doubt in this. Well, is it really an emergency? And I don't think that doubt. It's not coming from denial. It's not coming from apathy, not coming from lack of caring. I think what it might be coming from, at least in me, I identified this, is a little bit of social shame. Like, what if I'm doing this thing and I turn out to be wrong? Like, wouldn't that be shameful if I'm like saying this is an emergency and I'm telling people, like Greta Thunberg says, our house is on fire. What if I turn out to be wrong? And part of me is like, oh no, that would be so shameful. And then part of me is like, so what? So what if I turn out to be wrong? What if I turn out to be wrong by saying we need to plant more trees, or we need to grow more food closer to our homes, or we need to get to know our neighbors better to create a safer social climate in our neighborhoods? Oh, gee, what if it doesn't turn out to be a climate emergency? Wouldn't it be terrible if we planted a bunch of trees? Wouldn't that be awful? Or what if we set up a bunch of bike paths and made it safe to ride our bicycles? Wouldn't it be awful if a bunch of people started getting out and exercising and enjoying our sunshine? And wouldn't it be terrible if, like, we forego unnecessary fossil fuel travel or buy carbon offsets or whatever we can, and the waterway back? Wouldn't really a climate emergency, and then all this other stuff started happening? No, that would not be awful, obviously. So I would say, when I was a child, I sort of idolized World War II, which I'm about as anti-war as a person can get. But I had this weird idolatry of the World War II mobilization. And I realized it wasn't about war. It was about people feeling like we're together in this, like we're doing something together that is bigger than us. And our culture teaches me attitudes. It glorifies me attitudes. But us in this room, we don't like that. We're not cool with that. So I would say, and we have often seen people exhibit we attitudes, even in our me culture. Every one of us in this room has done the right thing, has done the we attitudes, and we've promoted them. So we can just as easily mobilize that aspect of ourselves. Another one of those dangerous things that I'll bring up is this attitude that, well, it's human nature. It's nothing we can do. It's in our DNA to be selfish and consume a bunch of resources. But no, it's not. It's not in our DNA. There's actually some anthropologists that have studied hunter-gatherer, modern-day hunter-gatherer cultures. And those cultures, culturally, they just don't like to hoard stuff. They're like, why would I want to carry around all this stuff? It's going to spoil, and it's their DNA any more than cultural. And the good thing about culture is that culture can be changed, and that each one of us is a unit of cultural transmission. And one thing that I found as an environmentalist, it's really easy to alienate people. Like, what if I'm saying just very casually, oh, I want to eat at that restaurant because they let you use your own cup. I'm not shaming anybody. I'm like, I want to eat there. Or just, well, I don't really want to incur the carbon footprint to travel over there because I want to save my carbon budget to visit my family. Just say it really casual, like carbon budget's just such a wide known thing. And it's not shaming anybody, but the person's just going to go, carbon budget? What do you mean? Or, wow, I found this really cool website of gold standard carbon offsets, and I was able to offset my trip to see my family, and it only costs like $20 on top of my plane ticket. Someone's going to go, huh? Carbon offsets? And so that kind of thing. So it's what we do, what we choose to practice, what we can practice, and then how we convey and share it in a contagious manner. Now, contagion has been a theme of the past couple of years. Contagion can be really good. And that's one of the themes of my environmentalism is personal contagion. You know, when I talk about my rainwater and rain barrels, that kind of thing. Look at my free water. So my homework and challenge to all of you is to think of something in your life that has brought you good, one of your environmental practices, and see how you can make it contagious to others. And I look forward to the discussion afterwards and hearing some of your thoughts and seeing how we can contagionize the grassroots green mobilization. Thank you.